Hello everybody! So this video is about Dungeons and Dragons. So this video is a 101 video. It is not a detailed review of the rules. It is a very basic video for those who are curious about Dungeons and Dragons. You know, some people may have heard about it, but they have no idea what Dungeons and Dragons it is, what it entails, or how people even play it. So this video is for you. So to start off, I'm going to name off 5 components that are required to play Dungeons and Dragons. But first off, Dungeons and Dragons is a role-playing game. Role-playing refers to the fact that you literally take on the role of a character and you gallivant in this fantasy world of Dungeons and Dragons, where you slay monsters and you deal with evil kings and all kinds of fun adventures. Now, the 5 components that you need to play Dungeons and Dragons are the books, the players, the dungeon master, the dice, and a big imagination. So, first things first, the books. Now, Dungeons and Dragons has a lot of rules, and those rules are contained in the Dungeons and Dragons books. This is specifically the 5th edition of Dungeons and Dragons. So the first book you will need is the Player's Handbook. Now, the Player's Handbook contains all the rules that you need to play, specifically for the players themselves, or the adventurers, or the party members. So the Player's Handbook has everything you need to know about how to create your character. The second book is the Dungeon Master's Guide. Now, the Dungeon Master Guide has everything you need to know about being a DM, a Dungeon Master. Everything that you need to know on how to create the world for the players, and how to mediate, and how to be a good storyteller. Now, the third book is the Monster Manual. Again, this is mostly for the DM, but it's fun for the players to look through too. The Monster Manual just has everything you need to know about the monsters involved in Dungeons and Dragons and their stats and everything you need to know. Now, the second thing that you need to play Dungeons and Dragons are players. You need people who want to play. So they will have to get their Player's Handbook. Those who are going to be players and participating that way have to create a character. Now, in Dungeons & Dragons, you play a fantasy role. So when a player creates a character in Dungeons & Dragons, they have to choose between 2 different things. They have to choose a class and a race. The race is sort of what you are in the Dungeons & Dragons world, and then the class is sort of what your occupation is. So the things that you have to choose from when you're creating your character are, the races you can pick are a dwarf, an elf, a halfling, a human, a dragonborn, a gnome, a half-elf, a half-orc, and a tiefling. And then the classes that you choose from, or your occupation, are barbarian, bard, cleric, druid, fighter, monk, paladin, ranger, rogue, sorcerer, wizard, and warlock. So when a player is putting together their character, they choose one of these 2 things, and then they create their character using the rules and the stats that they find in the Player's Handbook. And so a player will create a character using a character sheet. So a character sheet has everything you need to know about your character, how strong they are, what kind of armor they wear, and what kind of skills and powers they have. So over here you've got your stats, which you roll dice for. And then you have your skills and all your armor, your hit points, and over here a list of spells, specifically for my character. So my character is a paladin, and so I'm able to use spells. So the player will put together a character and make a character sheet. And so they're ready for their Dungeons and Dragons game night. It's a text message. All right, so that's the player. Next up is the Dungeon Master. Now, the DM, they are specifically responsible for creating the world and creating the game. Excuse me. Let's just turn this off, shall we? There we go. All right. Now, the Dungeon Master, they are responsible for putting the adventure together. They're the ones responsible for creating the world, for being the referee in the game and moderating. Now, whatever the DM says goes in the game. They are the person who is sort of omniscient in the game. So when it comes to role playing, you usually have to pass it by the DM first if you want to maybe tweak one of the rules and whatnot. And sometimes the DM will tweak the rules, but they'll let you know. So the Dungeon Master is the storyteller and the moderator and the creator of the world. All right, next come the dice. In Dungeons & Dragons, you need a set of polyhedral dice. So polyhedral just means multi-sided. So you can see in there, you've got all kinds of dice that come with it. So you got your classic D6, so just a regular cube dice. You got your D6, and excuse me, they're abbreviated. So a 6-sided die is called a D6. And then here's a D10, and then you've got it's still a D10, but it's a percentage die. And then you have your D12, and oh, I missed one. So there's a D8, an 8-sided die. There's a D4, which is just like a little pyramid. And then the beautiful D20. The D20 is what people roll in the game to determine whether they succeed or if they fail whenever they want to perform an action during the game. And lastly, the most important thing you need to play Dungeons & Dragons is a big imagination. You really just need to be able to step into a whole nother world, kind of like when you watch a movie or read a book. Because the game of Dungeons & Dragons, this is really important, is a game of the imagination. You're not sitting in front of a TV watching a movie while you play. You're not using a specific game board. You can use a playmat, but Dungeons & Dragons is a role-playing game. It's a storytelling game. For example, a typical Dungeons & Dragons night might look something like this. All the players have their character sheets all filled out. They've read over their character rules and they know how to play their character. They arrive to the Dungeons & Dragons night ready to play and ready to step into a whole nother world. The Dungeon Master has all his information together. He's set up behind a DM screen, or Dungeon Master screen, that blocks off his books or his computer and all his dice rolls from the other players, because the players are going on an adventure. They don't know everything that's going to happen. They really don't. So you arrive to your Dungeons & Dragons night, you've got your snacks ready, you got your drinks ready, you're ready to settle in and play an awesome game. So the Dungeon Master sets the stage. Alright, you're in a dark and dank cave. There's a foul odor coming from further down the cave, you don't know where, and you hear this deep breathing noise coming from somewhere deep in the cave. There's moss growing all over the rocks on the walls and just water dripping from the ceiling. So the Dungeon Master will describe the setting, and then the players then say what they would like to do. For instance, if you're facing a dragon, if you happened upon a dragon in this cave, and my character, who's a barbarian, says, "All right, I'm gonna attack the dragon." So the Dungeon Master will say, "All right, roll your dice, roll your D20." So you roll a D20, and you either show the Dungeon Master or you tell them what you got. And then the Dungeon Master will tell you whether you succeeded or not. And he or she will usually narrate what happens. So for instance, there was an instance where my paladin character, who wears full chainmail armor, was in a library, and I was trying to help one of my friends, but I had to sneak behind a bookcase. And every character in Dungeons & Dragons has specific strengths and weaknesses. Paladins are not very sneaky. We're just too bulky, too beefy, and just wasn't very sneaky. And so I decided to risk it though. So I rolled my D20, and I got what's called a natural 20, or a nat 20. And that means that I automatically succeed in whatever I tried to do. So I automatically succeeded in sneaking in this library in full chain armor. And that's just one of the things that makes us all, burst out laughing in the group, because it's just a funny image to think of this person sneaking in full chainmail. But there are other times when you get what's called a critical failure, when you roll a 1 on your D20, and that automatically means you fail no matter what at what you tried to do. And oftentimes, if you're in combat, that means that you hurt yourself if you roll a 1 during combat. So that's basically it for a Dungeons & Dragons 101 video. I really feel like Dungeons & Dragons is a great game to help with social interaction. I mean, you learn basic math skills with your dice, just basic addition skills. You learn excellent reading skills because you were sitting there trying to figure out the rules and read the rules. You also learn skills when dealing with people who are very different from you, not only just in the D&D setting, but also with the other players. With the other players, you really have to learn to work together and to see everybody's strengths and to emphasize that in the game. And that's why, personally, I love Dungeons & Dragons. So if you have any questions or any comments, just let me know and I'll try and answer them. Thanks.